Brian, absolutely honoured, delighted, privileged to have you here join me in the studio. And you're someone that I've come across a few years ago. I actually reached out to you several years ago where you were having an interview with Jen Zamparelli on 2FM, which you're now a regular on. And I heard your story and I thought, this guy, I need to speak to him. Incredible story. That doesn't even cut it. Reached out to you and you're in the middle of a thesis or a PhD at the time.
PhD thesis, yeah.
And it didn't happen. So I'm actually very grateful that it didn't at that point, because that would have been a Zoom conversation and it wouldn't have been this face-to-face interaction and we wouldn't have really met. So it's brilliant to meet you, because I know your story. I know that what the listeners are going to hear today is absolutely going to blow their mind. It's going to inspire them. So stand by, everyone. So you've been on quite a journey. You were addicted to heroin for 15 years. You've now become a doctor. And I've had my experiences with addiction as well in the past. Porn addiction. Alcohol was a big problem for me as well in my early 20s. And what I've come to understand through my own recovery process was that the porn was not the problem. The alcohol was not the problem. The work addiction, which later became the addiction, was not the problem. There was an underlying pain beneath this addiction. And it was only then when I found the source of the pain that influenced my behaviors and actions and my life from that point forward that I began to heal from the pain and therefore move on from the addiction. So for yourself, the heroin was not the problem. What was the underlying pain beneath that addiction for yourself?
Yeah, it's excuse me, it's really interesting, Gavin, as well. And when people hear me saying that heroin was not the problem, it was just a symptom of an underlying problem, it's a little bit strange when people hear that. And for me, it was panic attacks and anxiety, which came from a traumatic experience. So I probably had several traumas in my life, I suppose. I came into the world with a condition known as intestinal malrotation. In simpler terms, that meant that my guts were twisted and I couldn't get, I got very little nutrition into my body. And it turned out that I had to have an operation at 3 weeks of age. And what was interesting about the operation was, and for any infant having an operation pre-1985, is that you would have had an operation without a general anaesthetic. That was the practice pre-1985. The medical practice believed that infants wouldn't really remember it anyway, and that the anaesthetic would have been too dangerous. So the cost-benefit analysis, they says, nah, they'll be okay, they'll be fine, they won't remember it. But what we know today is that the body keeps the score. It's a great book by Bessel van der Kolk, and that trauma, even though you don't cognitively remember it, that left a biological imprint on my brain and body, literally turning me into a finely tuned anxiety machine, scanning the world for threats and danger. It's an evolutionary response that the body is working to look for other potential threats like that. And I think that set me up. That set the foundations for me to be agitated, anxious, and I was susceptible to worry, panic, bodily agitation. I always had this tightness around my chest. I had a phobic fear of my heartbeat, breath and pulse. And I was just never happy in my own skin. And that's, for me, that's what drove my entire addiction. Like, once I found drugs and drugs came into my life, all of a sudden here was the anesthetic that I needed all of my life, the anesthetic that I never got. I thought I found a solution, and I thought I was smart enough not to get addicted, and I could use drugs a little bit differently than other people. The self-deception was kicking in pretty early. And that's what it was. And that was the driver. That was the underlying root cause of all of my problems. I was always looking to escape and avoid that emotional and psychological pain. And drugs were the weapon I chose to fight that battle.
How did your environment influence you from those early ages?
The environment was a massive influence, because I was sort of good. I was good at football. And I was good in school as well. So I had good belief that I would go and do something with my life. Even though I struggled with anxiety, my mum and dad, like, they had their alcohol struggles as well. There was alcoholism within the family, but they were loving and they were great providers as well. So I never worried about basic needs. My basic needs were always met. And I had great self-belief that I would go on and do things. But the area where I grew up, great community spirit in the area, but it was very violent, full of drugs, robbed cars every night. It was probably the most dangerous place, not dangerous, the most destructive place in Dublin growing up in the 90s. It was a place called Drumheath in Ladyswell, but a great place. But they just took a lot of families with a lot of trauma from other challenging areas of Dublin, like Ballymun and Darndale. I think 80% of the families came from Ballymun. They threw them into this little estate with 200 houses, and havoc ensued. So there was drugs everywhere, and it was just like a rite of passage that you will take drugs and probably even sell drugs. Like everyone sort of just sold drugs. That's just the way it was. So that played a role in terms of normalizing drugs and normalizing those certain challenging behaviors, and it definitely played a massive role.
It also normalized the reason to fear for you as well, because as you mentioned, you go from that experience of the operation and being in extreme pain, which is infiltrated by another human being, and then it embeds this fear in you that people can't be trusted and you could potentially experience this pain again, but you're in an environment that is almost consumed with fear and violence and these difficulties. So when you step outside your door, you don't feel safe.
Interesting you say that. What comes to mind when you say that, one of my very first memories, I moved to, it was Ladyswell at the time it was called, it is Drumheath, and when I moved there, one of my earliest memories was, I think I was 7 at the time, and there was a lot of challenges with some of the older lads in the estate. I think they were younger, but I think they were probably only 14, 15, but they were very old to me back then when I was a 7-year-old. But there was some of the older men in the estate who were trying to sort of bring a bit of safety to the area. So there was a vigilante movement. So it was this vigilante movement back in this would have been the 80s actually, the late 80s in Dublin. And I remember my dad going out and the word being a vigilante, and I'd hear some of the stories, be talking to my mum. So it was just like, it was like a war zone that was out there as a 7-year-old. So that was my earlier experience. I was sort of getting conditioned to view my external world in that way. So lots of fear, really building on that earlier fear that I had.
When was your first exposure to drugs then?
My first exposure to drugs, I was quite good at football, and there was talk that I could have gone doing trials. In retrospect, I don't think I was good. I wasn't good enough to make it, but I was pretty good in the area. Like I was a very good player for the area. And I would never use drugs. I would never smoke cigarettes. My friends started smoking cigarettes when we were 14, and I was like, he's mad. Like I just thought they were bonkers. But I think the curiosity was starting to kick in then around just being curious about drugs and different things then as well. And I remember I was injured for a couple of months, and we were on the roof of the football dressing rooms, the big green boxes that they have for dressing rooms. And we were on the roof sitting, messing around, and the lads were smoking cigarettes, and one of them lit up like a roll-up cigarette, big dirty Samson tobacco cigarette, and I'd no interest in that. But one of them said, the head buzz you get off that. And I remember that piqued me interest. You get a head buzz off that. And I had my first puff of a cigarette on that dressing room, and it was just a puff of a smoke, tobacco. But that little head buzz appealed to me greatly. And within that summer, that was the summer, and within that summer, I'd start smoking cigarettes. I start smoking hash very, very quickly. We start sniffing petrol down the fields. We start taking tablets. They were called duck eggs at the time. They're like benzodiazepines. And we just it escalated really, really quick. So that was at 14 years of age, start drinking alcohol as well. And then when I was 16, so it was a bit of time went by, but when I was 16, I was getting really interested in drugs. And we were big fans of Jim Morrison. We used to go to my friend Rory's house, great guy. Still struggling with addiction, unfortunately, but we used to go to his house every Friday and knock the lights off. His mum and dad would be gone to the pub, and we'd sit around smoking like ridiculous amounts of cannabis resin at the time, the old hash, and we'd play the doors, the candles going, the whole room be full of smoke. And Jim was our god. Jim Morrison was our god. And Jim said, try everything once, experience everything once. So he says, okay, Jim, we'll try heroin once. And obviously it didn't turn out that way. And interestingly enough, I always think back of that. There was 7 of us that done heroin once for the first time, and only 2 of us got addicted, and it was me and Rory, the 2 that struggled most with our emotions. So I think it's important to recognize that heroin, it's not instantly addictive to everybody. Again, it taps into that it's a symptom of an underlying problem. Both me and Rory had bigger underlying problems. So heroin took our pain away. And that's what made it addictive. Not rewarding you as in it feels incredible. It does. But it takes away that pain. And the incredible feeling also doesn't last very long, and it quickly brings you to hell. But it was that was the escalation really quickly of us sort of getting into harder drugs from that first time down drugs.
And how did that have a knock-on effect with the rest of your life then?
It took a long time, Gavin. I think it's important with my story. Like, I was chronically addicted for 15 years. So I started taking heroin at 16, 17 years of age. And I didn't believe, I still thought I was going to go out and be someone in the world. And it took a long couple of years for heroin really to take hold. I was addicted from the first moment, but we always says, right, we'll just do it on every now and then, once a month. Then after a couple of months, it crept into once a week. So it was me and Rory then. We'd do it on a Monday and a Tuesday night, but we'd still go out with the lads and drink on a Saturday, Sunday, because that's what we all did in the group. But we had this little secret addiction that was there. And I was sort of living two lives, and we genuinely believed we had the secret that you didn't have to be this stereotypical train spotting addict. You could actually use heroin in a safe way. That's what we genuinely believed. But it was reeling us in slowly. And then by the time I was 20, I had a full-blown panic attack that raised my baseline anxiety to a whole new level. I used to blame Red Bull for the panic attack, but I was actually taking like ridiculous amounts of cocaine at the time. So in retrospect, I think it was the cocaine that really heightened that. And that sort of set me off on a journey where I wasn't really into uppers anymore. It was all about downers, and I was always trying to numb that anxiety, because it was relentless. It really was. So I started using heroin daily from the age of 20. So I was chronically addicted for those 15 years. So yeah, that's where the journey was. I actually forget, what was the initial question? I was going somewhere with that.
How did it affect your life on the outside?
Yeah, so it was nearly 2 lives I was leading at that stage, because I came from, I'll say in inverted commas, a respectable family, a family that didn't really do drugs. I wasn't expected that I would be a heroin addict. So I kind of had this secret life of a heroin addict crippled with anxiety versus someone else that had a job and was going places. And all through my 30s, like through heroin addiction, I went to my job. When I done my interview for my job at 18 years of age, I went with tinfoil and a tutor of heroin in my John Player Blue Box. When I left that job at 35 years of age, I was still chronically addicted. Like, that's when I went to the depths. But during that time, I was sort of living 2 lives all of the time. But it was only when I hit my late 20s, early 30s that it really started taking its toll. Like, I sort of successfully, if you could say successfully, I successfully used heroin and I was a functional addict for all of my 20s. Successful in terms of external success, but inwardly I was broken and I was so tormented and I was in turmoil and I was so misaligned with my core values of who I wanted to be versus who I was. My feelings were driving everything. So it was this completely fake life. It was a facade. Whereas it's sort of those 2 worlds began to collide in my latter 20s, early 30s, and it was very obvious. Everyone sort of knew I was an addict at this stage, and it just all collapsed. But it still took another couple of years, like until I hit 35, that I lost everything, and it completely annihilated me and forced me to look at life from another perspective. Like, kicked me very hard enough that I'd have to do something else. What
did you lose?
Well, I lost my mind. I went into a form of psychosis at one stage where I just thought, I just had some crazy thoughts. Like, at one stage, it's kind of funny looking back on it now, but I remember thinking that I was the only real person in the world. That when I wasn't looking at people, were they really moving? Like, it was like this insidious thing, which is a very egotistical, self-centered thing. Like, I literally believed that I was the center of the universe and everyone was doing these things on the side to sort of set me up in a way, which is really weird. And I never really believed it. I used to laugh at it, but it kept on coming back. I lost my health, massively lost my health. I was on death's door. Like, I literally, if I didn't get clean at 35, I don't think I'd survive in a year. I was taking so much drugs. I was a very successful addict in terms of getting money and getting drugs. And that was killing me massively. And I was really, like, there's pictures of me before and after, and I was on death's door. But the most important thing that I lost my job in the end, but the most important thing I lost was all the relationships. And I think one of the core elements of addiction is that disconnection with other people. But I think it starts with a disconnection with yourself. So I needed an anesthetic to numb anxiety, but it's not selectively. It didn't just selectively numb anxiety. It numbed every feeling I had. So I disconnected from myself. And when I disconnected from myself, I disconnected with the relationships around me. And I have an incredible family. Like, my family are heroes. For me personally, they are. Me even throughout my addiction, they tried to help me so much. Like, all of my family, every one of them. And when I found recovery, and I was down in Wexford at a treatment centre, the whole gang of them would go down to Wexford every single week to help me out and support me, even though the pain that I caused them. But in the latter stages, I lost them. I'd already lost them because I'd lost that connection, which I only realise is so strong and powerful because of the connection we have today. I've rebuilt those bridges, but I lost everything. And if I died, or if everything went in a different direction, then I would have lost these beautiful connections that I have with my family that I just ruined. So that for me it's a scary thought, but it's beautiful because we've regained, like, we're a very happy family today. Like, everyone's doing well, and there was a lot of addiction issues within the family. And it was only when I found recovery that the light shone on everyone else. Oh, wow. Addiction isn't just about heroin, it's alcohol, it's other marijuana, it's other things, like different poisons, same issues can be driving the addiction as well. So it was quite interesting.
The change almost happens through osmosis. They see the transformation in you, and they're inspired to go through a similar process themselves.
Yeah. There's a line I heard one time that addiction isn't a spectator sport. Eventually the whole family get to play. But I think recovery's the same. The whole family get to play in that too.
Mm-hmm. Was there something you lost in that process or along that part of the journey that you haven't regained?
I don't know. I don't know if there is. I think that I have regained so much more. Not regained, I have gained so much more as a result of the pain that I went through. And I fundamentally believe that our kryptonite can become our superpower. I like to think I have a level of awareness now that I never would have reached if I didn't go into the depths of addiction. I have a resilience now that I certainly never would have had if I didn't go into the depths of addiction. And for me, resilience isn't being dogged and determined. It's about using challenges as the fuel to learn and grow. So I've gained so much, and the only thing I would change about my life, I wouldn't even change my addiction. I would change the harms I caused to my loved ones, but I wouldn't change what I went through because it's just given me so much. What I would say, there could be a level of intimacy that I could have developed if I never went into addiction with my family. Like, we have incredible connections now, but there's something within my family as well. We're not huggers. We don't talk about how much we love each other. I can say I love them, but I don't say it to their face, which is quite interesting. So a challenge for me, and something I aim to do. It's something I want to do. It's just to sit down with them individually and have that intimate conversation and let them know. But when I talk about that, being vulnerable like that, like, I can tell my partner Natalie, I could tell her how I feel all of the time. But there's something about that part of my life and us as a family. We don't do that. That's not the game we play. We show our love through other ways. Like, there's an incredible amount of love, but we just don't speak about it in that way. So maybe that's something that I could have had if I never went into addiction. But I don't know. I just don't think we're a family that do that. It's interesting.
What's the barrier there, do you feel?
What is the barrier? I don't know what the barrier is. The barrier is fear. The barrier is fear, which it's an obscure fear because it actually doesn't really exist. I suppose, like, for me, intellectually and emotionally, I know vulnerability is strength. Like, think of a soldier jumping on a bomb to save other people. Like, he's being vulnerable, physically vulnerable, but that's courage and strength. Could be stupidity as well, depends on the situation. But vulnerability for me is strength. And to show vulnerability in that moment is the strength that I would need to show. But it's just a fear of being open. So it's quite interesting. It's quite an interesting thing. But I think it's just fear, but it's an unfounded fear, which is quite interesting. So I'm gonna break down those barriers soon. It's in me on my agenda.
The next mission, yes, yeah.
The next mission list.
You've conquered so many barriers in your life so far, and you came up against quite a significant barrier after 15 years of addiction, and you reached the tipping point. You ended up at the bottom of the pit. What did that look like?
It's a really interesting one, because the big pain for me was the relentless slog of addiction, especially in the latter years. It was Groundhog Day. I couldn't sleep. The drugs weren't working anymore. They were just making me worse. I would drive my car, and by the time I would get anywhere, my hands would be sweating because I'd be clasping the steering wheel so tight and sort of creating this weird shell around my chest to protect my chest. That was the slog. That was the pain. And when I lost my job and I lost all abilities, I was in €50,000 of debt to drug dealers, money lenders, and banks. I lost my ability to buy drugs and get drugs. And even drug dealers, I used to sell drugs to fund my habit, but even drug dealers wouldn't give me drugs to sell because I was so unreliable in every form of life. And when that happened, I went to the clinic where I was a registered addict, and I said, look, it's all falling apart. I need to try to get clean. I didn't think I could live in a world. My fundamental narrative of life was, I can't cope with anxiety. I need drugs. And I knew I couldn't live that life anymore. It had all fallen apart. So I had to do something else. I felt like a rat trapped in a corner. So I says, look, I have to try to get clean. Now, my goal was to get clean and come back and do drugs in a more successful way, because I didn't think I could live without drugs. But I was told I needed to do a benzo detox before I could do a heroin detox. And then I was told I'd have to wait 4 months before a bed would be available for a benzo detox. I didn't think I'd be alive in 4 months, never mind anything else. So against medical advice, I done a benzo detox at home on my own. And I wouldn't advise anyone to do that because it can kill you. I got very lucky. But 2 nights into that detox was not only the most painful night in my life, it was also the most important night in my life. And what occurred was that I had what's called a grand mal convulsive seizure, which occurs when every neuron in your brain fires at the same time. So it was like this cascading effect of neurons firing across my brain. I was pulsing, convulsing and twisting on the floor in a full-blown seizure. My younger brother, who was minding me, lovely, sensitive soul, James, great human being. He was in addiction at the time himself, but he's since found recovery too, but he was minding me. And as I was seizing on the floor, he didn't know what was going on. He was trying to hold me. He was like screaming, what's going on, trying to get through to me, but I was gone. And in the last convulsion, I'd actually drove my teeth, splitting my tongue down the centre, slumped on the floor, blood pouring out of my mouth. My brother James thought I was dead, rang me dad, Brian's dead, I think he's dead. And my family flew up to the house. They all came up to the house. My mum rang my sister. So my sister came to the house thinking she was going to be walking into me dead on the floor. Ambulance outside, blue lights flashing. So that was the final pain that I brought to the family. But yeah, I got brought to hospital. And when I was brought to hospital, I woke up later that night on a trolley. And when I woke up, I remember just being broken. I was so broken, physically, mentally, and emotionally broken. Felt like I had a bag of needles in my mouth from splitting my tongue. And I just had no strength. Like, I never wanted to use drugs more in that moment than I did right there, because I was in so much pain, physically and psychologically and emotionally. But I hadn't got the strength. I was so weak and broken. I just hadn't got the strength. And I remember looking at the wall at one stage and seeing this fire extinguisher hanging on the wall, red fire extinguisher. And I was looking at it in this tunnel vision for a few minutes, and I had this weird realization that I didn't really know what it was. It was like this feeling in the pit of my stomach saying, something's really wrong here. I should know it. I should know what that is. And I began to panic and looking around the room saying, what's going on here? I don't understand my environment. And I tried to label things in the room like beds and walls. And it was like I knew I should have known what these things were, but I couldn't bring it cognitively to my mind. And I remember thinking in that moment, oh my God, that's brain damage. You've destroyed your brain. Game over. No coming back from this. And I remember just being waiting for anxiety and panic to just consume me like it always did. But I remember just saying to myself, I can't fight this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. You win. I am done. And I lay back down on the trolley, just sort of accepting my fate of panic and fear over the fact I was brain damaged. But instead of that, I felt a sense of peace. And what I've retrospectively realised was that that was the first moment in my life that I ever stopped fighting anxiety or trying to fight anxiety. I stopped trying to fight with my own mind, resist reality. I put up the white flag. I surrendered. And I truly believe that that was the moment, as painful as it was. And it's why I believe that our pains and our challenges can be our superpowers. Because I believe that was the moment that completely changed my life. It gave me that moment to surrender, allowed me to look at the world in a different way. And even though I had other seizures after that, I had other hospital visits, 3 weeks later, I found myself on a detox facility to get off 15-year heroin addiction. Something had massively shifted, and it was like I was looking at the world through a different lens. And for me, that pain became the light.
Acceptance, was it?
Yeah, acceptance was a massive part. Yeah, acceptance was probably the biggest part of it. Accept, and I love that line. Like I wouldn't be a big fellowship kind of person in recovery. It works for some people. It just wasn't really for me. But there's a prayer. It doesn't belong to fellowship, but there's a prayer called the Serenity Prayer, and it's accept the things you cannot change. Grant me the serenity. Accept the things I cannot change. Oh, I forget the bloody prayer now. It's a great prayer, but the wisdom to know the difference. So what you can change, accept what you can't change, change what you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So in that moment, acceptance was the key. I was broken, I was beaten, put down the fight, and learned I needed to fall down before I got back up again. So acceptance was definitely the key.
You couldn't cope on your own at that point. So what were some of the, or who were some of the people that lifted you back up again so you could take that step forward?
Yeah, my family were absolutely instrumental. So I could, I couldn't even. I had to make phone calls at that time while I was out of the hospital after having the seizures. And I remember having to make an important phone call, and I couldn't even hold the phone in my hand. The strength in my arms had gone. And my dad came up. My two brothers were minding me through the withdrawals, finishing the withdrawals. My dad was up. All of my family just kept on coming up. My mum couldn't come up. She was just so broken. Like even through them times when she came to the treatment facilities to talk, every time she opened her mouth, she would just start crying. She couldn't actually speak. So she nearly had to look after herself in that moment. But she was there for me as well all of the time. So my whole family were there. They were making all the calls for me to get into a detox facility. Then when I got into the detox facility, I had the care workers there. I had the support of other people that had gone through addiction. And when I landed in the detox, that shift in perspective that I had this incredible hope, this incredible energy come into me. I don't know where it came from. And this intense curiosity and willingness to find out why I was so broken emotionally and mentally. Now I had this sort of energy and hope for the future. Something had shifted and I felt it. And when I got to the detox facility, there was a psychologist there, and I was sort of explaining what had happened to me, and they gave me books. I started meditating. So I had all of these professional supports as well. And then when I got to a treatment center after detox, I continued to have those professional supports. Funnily enough, when I got out of treatment after that, I was expecting there to be a parade. Brian's out of treatment. He's back. All my friends, be a parade down the street. Everyone was excited about Brian getting better again. But it turned out I had no friends. There was no parade. I had isolated myself so much. I completely lost touch with reality that my family were the only people that were there. My best mate Gar was there as well, and two other friends as well, Deco and Rory. But they had their own challenges as well. But that's when I leaned into fellowship for a while as well. I didn't need fellowship so much for staying sober and clean. It was more for the support systems, which is part of that process as well. But I very quickly went into academic circles because I wanted to learn about the human mind and the human brain. And I started forming friendships and mentorships in there as well. So again, it was all about connection. But having my family as the foundational support structure for me there, I've only realised in the last year or two, was fundamentally the most important thing I had, because I knew that no matter what else I'd done, they were there for me. And those foundations were strong, are still strong.
What were some of the setbacks that you experienced after the seizure, after the acceptance? I'm pretty sure it wasn't a linear process from that point forward. And how did you manage it?
Yeah, there was the heroin withdrawal was rough. it was absolutely rough. The methadone withdrawal would have been at that stage, and the physicality of that, like, it's hard to describe what it's like. It's like a flu multiplied by 10 nearly, but it's like this fever in your bones nearly. But the physical aspect is hard, but it's the emotional aspect as well. Like, I remember being afraid to open my wardrobe for a couple of days while I was in detox. Like, I was afraid, I don't know what I was afraid of. I was just afraid of the wardrobe. It didn't make any rational sense. And I remember there was one night, like, you don't really sleep when you're going through a heroin detox. And I'd say there was a course of 5, 6, 7, 8 nights, hard to remember. But it felt like I didn't sleep at all. I think I had micro sleeps. I think there was elements of sleep somewhere. But I'd just sit up in the kitchen of that little house on the outskirts of Dublin. I'd sit up in the kitchen, and it was funny. They used to lock the knives away every night, and I always wondered why they done that. But I remember being in the kitchen that night. I says, that's why they locked the knives up, just in case you get any funny thoughts. But I remember the tick tock of the clock felt like it was going in slow motion, like so slow, and it was like this eternity that was never going to end. And I remember at one stage, it was the only time since my seizure that I had a talk, because something about the seizure made me realise that I can never do drugs again. But when I was in that room, the only thing that kept me from climbing out the window and walking back to Dublin to get drugs was my fear of the dark. That was bizarre because I was in that detox. So that was a real struggle I had within the detox. But once I got through that, my intense thirst for life and for curiosity to learn about the human mind, it just sort of carried me on this journey. I'm so grateful for that, because it just sort of brought me along for a ride. And when I landed I'd done a degree in psychology straight away in Maynooth University. And I believe I was given, I don't know what it was, a perspective shift, an awakening, a gift, dumb luck. But I was just so present. That's the only way I can describe it. I remember just looking at the trees. It was a very spiritual experience, and I'd look at the trees and everything just felt so alive. The world just felt like it was glowing, and it was so alive. And that was really powerful while I was in the detox, but it continued to resonate with me for a long time. But when I went to college, I began to get obsessed about college. And in second year, I was doing really well. My newfound obsession with learning was helping me to do really, really well. And I got ideas of a PhD, and I was chasing top class honours and top of the class and all of these awards to help me to get the PhD, the scholarship. And on the back of that, I was working too hard, and I was focusing too much on that. So 2 years into my recovery, I remember walking through Maynooth College, and were you ever in the University of Maynooth? Fabulous university, especially the South Campus. And they have these huge sequoia trees in the campus. They are ginormous. They are beautiful. They must be around probably thousands of years. I don't know. But I remember being blown away by these trees when I first arrived at the campus. And one of the days, 2 years in, I was walking there, and I was walking through the campus, and I was feeling a bit anxious and stressed. And I remember having this realization. I was looking at the trees thinking, I don't see them like I used to. I used to see them, and they felt so alive. And it was like everything came to me really quickly. Wow. I was thrown away this gift I was given, whatever the hell it was. And I suddenly realized there was a time before that, while I was doing delivery driving to get me delivering food to get me through college. And I had a little mini relapse where I had a bit of a cold, and I started taking Solpadeine. Now, that mightn't sound like a big deal to many people, but for a former heroin addict to take Solpadeine for the cold, and I didn't take 2, I took 3 the first time, and I started taking 3, 4s and 5s at one stage as well to get that little bit of a buzz. Now, I didn't continue it, but I did it and left it parked there for a while. And all of these feelings as I was looking at these trees in Maynooth University just started rushing back to me saying, oh my God, what have I been doing? It was like another wake-up call. And even though I was doing phenomenally well in Maynooth, I was like, I need to quit this. I have to get away from college. I can't do this. My fundamental well-being is more important than anything else. And I start reaching out to different people. And there was a book I read by a guy. God, I forget his name actually. How do I forget his name? He was in the Eckhart Tolle book club. So Eckhart Tolle was a supporter of his work, and he was an educator. He was a professor who explored spiritual experiences. And for some reason, I had this urge just to reach out to him. So I sent an email to his college in Nottingham, I think is where he worked. And he sent me an email back. And the email said, look, you're in a good place being in an academic environment. Because I was thinking of going to Tibet to meditate for the rest of my life, like nearly afraid to lose that feeling, or going chasing like an addict, chasing that feeling again that I'd lost. So he reached out back to me and he gave me an email and he says, look, you're in a great place, but you need to focus, number one, on your mental and emotional well-being. That's got to be your priority. And from that point, I stayed in college, but I made my mental and emotional well-being my number one. I began developing a program for my own life. I call it a program for life, which has since become my business model. That's my business model that I deliver to schools and corporates, leadership teams in the world. Now, I've been over to Canada recently to deliver them as well. But it stemmed from that, to look after my emotional health first. And I didn't study as much. I focused on my health first, and my results got even better as a result, which was really, really interesting. So again, the challenge became the superpower. For me, that's real resilience. It's using the challenge as the fuel for growth. So I nearly have a way of looking at the world now, is when challenges come into me life, I lean in and say, right, where's the learning in that? So that was definitely the biggest challenge I had, and it could have been a tipping point for me to go in a different direction. But thankfully, again, I had the supports of other people at the time.
Mm-hmm. You had the incredible challenge as well of going back and finding the source of your anxiety and your pain. How did that come about? And was it an instant memory, or did this sort of process evolve over time as you were recovering and you're going through this potentially spiritual practice and your routines and mental health program and all the rest of it? At what point did you realize, oh fuck, that's what it was?
That's what it was, yeah. That's a really interesting question, because that's another challenge I had that I forgot about. So I was in a big meditative vibe at that time. I was all about stillness. I was all around about nature, meditation, and just being connected and being present. That's really the key of where it's at. And I had this realization that when I had this sort of sense of the world was so alive, the first time I experienced that, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what was going on. And I done a meditation soon after that in the treatment center, and the meditator was talking about thoughts will come in and thoughts will come out. And I realized that my mind was really quiet. So that sort of set me off on a journey to explore, is the nature of a quiet mind, and is it linked to emotions? And if I was compulsively thinking and telling myself that I'm a piece of crap, that I'm not man enough, I'll never be able to change, was that driving my challenging emotions? So I explored, a lot of my research explored self-talk and how we speak to ourselves. Because if you tell yourself you're a piece of crap every single day, you're going to feel like a piece of crap. That's a lay version of what the research shows. Language is a vehicle for emotion. My favorite quote is by a Persian poet called Hafiz. The words you speak become the house you live in. And I was still tormented a little bit. Not tormented, I still struggled with the scar on my belly, that initial scar that I had as a 3-week-old baby. And even when I talk about it here today, I can sit with it, I can rub that scar on my belly, I can touch it, I can go there. But a couple of years into recovery, I still felt very queasy over that. And my heartbeat, I still had a problem sort of accessing my heartbeat and thinking and focusing on my heartbeat. And I could be doing a meditation, feeling very calm, very zen. And if the meditator, the guided meditation says, now go to your heart center, that word would make me feel anxious. So that was really interesting. I was like, how come words hold so much power? And it was a block that I hadn't gotten through yet. This sort of trauma that I experienced, I believe it came as a baby. I will never really fundamentally know that, but from the research I've explored, and it was only when I was researching my book in 2019 that I was going deep into this. And that's when I found out about that infants had operations without a general anesthetic. And when I was interviewing a psychologist called Alison Keaton, she's a fabulous psychologist, I was talking to Alison about my earlier pain and me as a baby having this operation. And she's an incredible psychotherapist, really brilliant. And she noticed that I kept on calling infant me. I didn't call it a baby or an infant. I called it an organism. And she asked me, Brian, why do you keep on referring to your infant self as an organism? And it was like this powerful moment from her and me. We both got emotional. It was like, oh my God, it was like this release of energy. I was dehumanizing myself. So I was still creating that disconnection from my former self, who had been treated non-humanly to a certain extent. So I dehumanized that baby as well, because I didn't want to feel that pain. So that started me off on a journey of inner child work, of really exploring that trauma, focusing on my heartbeat, focusing on the scar on my belly. And for me to be able to sit here and put my hand on my heart today, it's nothing short of a miracle. It really is, because of what I went through my entire life. So that was a huge challenge, and getting over that was probably one of the biggest obstacles I ever faced. And it seems so easy putting your hand on your heart, but that was one of the biggest obstacles I ever faced. And the journey is always ongoing, but that was really one of the biggest moments the biggest hurdles that I had to get over.
How do you manage the triggers now that will inevitably arise when it comes to your past?
Again, as I mentioned, I see challenges as fuel for growth. Like I have an incredible relationship with anxiety. I nearly enjoy anxiety. I don't enjoy feeling anxious. I enjoy my ability to laugh at it and swat it aside and say, you have no power over me anymore. And I enjoy that. And the triggers for me are no longer triggers in terms of relapse. Like, I do feel I'm pretty bulletproof for relapse because I've gotten to the root core of the problem. Now, if World War III happens in Ireland and there's no electricity and there's no food and I'm trying to protect my family, I'm sure those triggers could arise. So I'm never completely bulletproof. Or I was speaking to someone recently about being in prison. And it says, imagine I got locked up for some absurd reason out of the blue for 5 years. Well, maybe I said, well, maybe it's worth it. Like, see, you're never completely immune, that way. But as it stands, I feel pretty much bulletproof to those kinds of triggers, those mental health kind of triggers. But there's always the ongoing triggers, like with family and relationships and stuff. Like me dad, I always use my dad as an example of this. Lovely man. But he'd have a bias towards negativity, let's say, especially when it's political and stuff like that. So there's trigger points with him. So I've actually done a lot of work on myself to sort of be able to spend quality time with him without getting triggered. And again, he's been my greatest teacher with that as well. And then in my relationship, like Natalie, my partner now today, it's the ones we care about most and the challenges they have. We're actually we're moving house. We were supposed to get our keys last week. We didn't get our keys. We're getting it next week, but all of our stuff was arriving in the house today. Or yesterday, sorry. Yesterday it was. And I was fine. I don't do stress. What will be, will be. I'm not going to argue with reality. That's a mantra of mine. But she was getting freaked out. And by her getting freaked out, that was stressing me out. So it's the challenges you have with other people. Those challenges will always be there. But I think the reality is today that I have a toolbox. Like, it's not that I enjoy anxiety, as I said. I have a toolbox to reach into. So I could go for a run. I could do breath work. I could speak to somebody else. I could journal on it. There's so many things that you can actually do in the moment that's going to serve you going forward, rather than reacting emotionally in that moment to drive you in the opposite direction. So it's reaching into the toolbox will be the way.
What about your friend Rory, who hasn't been so fortunate?
Yeah, it's a terrible shame. Rory's just such a great guy. He really is. He's such a funny character as well. Like, I've reached out multiple times to him, and we've gotten together a few times. He jokingly calls me the preacher. Oh, here's the preacher. I never was a preacher to him, so I don't know where he goes there. But I think I'm a little bit aversive to him in the sense that I sort of, in a good way, I am something he could be, but he can't get there. So seeing me as probably a little bit of aversive. I'm probably putting words in his mouth. I don't know whether that's true. But we've met up on several occasions, and he was so clever, so smart. He had the world at his feet, and he just had those emotional struggles. And I remember recently, it was about 2-3 years ago, I arranged to meet up. He always has different phones, so he's hard to get in contact with. But I arranged to meet up, and a big part of my journey has been reaching out to mentors to help me on the journey. And I'd reached out to a guy called Fergal Nocton. So Fergal was the CEO of Glen Dimplex. The family company is worth 1.5 billion. An incredible company, incredibly wealthy, incredible guy. Actually, Fergal is as well. And he introduced me to the Provost of Trinity. So one night, 2 or 3 years ago, I was in Trinity House, 1 Grafton Street, in the Provost's house. And beautiful home. Like, it was an absolutely fabulous experience just talking to the president, which is the Provost, and Fergal Nocton, having a really fine dining kind of an experience. Like, it was a really profound experience, back in the ages in royalty in a way. And then the following night I was meeting Rory, And Rory says, I'll meet you at the Blanchardstown Centre. So we are going for a stroll around, for a walk around the Blanchardstown Centre. And Rory's in the depths of addiction. He was a heroin addict for years, but he struggles now with alcohol as well, because happens to a lot of people in addiction. They use methadone and heroin doesn't do the job anymore. So alcohol becomes a vice. And he's okay about me telling the story. I asked him, but we went in. He says, I need to go into the centre for a minute. So he says, I'm just going to run it to get smokes. Do you want that? I says, no, I'm fine. So I was standing in Blanchardstown Centre, in the centre. He went into Dunn's and I'm standing outside. And all of a sudden I'm seeing security guards running around. Some of them are scoping me out and they're looking at me. I'm like, what's going on? I'm still waiting for Rory, 15, 20 minutes. And then all of a sudden I see him down the end at the doors and he's screaming, oh, Pennie. That was my nickname back in the day. Pennie, come on. So I walked down and said, what the hell is going on? He says, I went in to rob some drink and I got caught and I got chased by security. So one night I'm in one number one Grafton Street. The next night I'm nearly getting arrested. I could have been in a cell like for getting arrested for robbing alcohol in the shops. But that was just Rory all over, but us all over. We were both partners in crime back in the day, and we just had to have a look. Like heroin is in where we grew up was called tack at one stage. So me and Rory used to have our own language. So we go for a game of knick-knack paddywhack. We just say, give a dog a bone. And we'd have our own little language. We'd have a look and we'd go do it. So yeah, it makes me really sad. Really, really sad, because I haven't got the solution. People think I have the solution because of the journey, especially if they don't know about addiction. And I wish I had some kind of a way to get through to them, but people just have to find their own journey. It's really sad. And there's so many people caught in the belly of that, and you just can't get out.
Have you been able to pull people out?
I wouldn't. No, I don't think anyone can pull anyone out. I think that's the reality of it. And what I'll say, I kind of have a framework for thinking about this. I'll give you an example of my brother James. So when I broke free from addiction, I realised that my two brothers who I was living with were both deep in addiction. It wasn't heroin, it was coke, it was weed, it was alcohol. And I tried to sort of get them to see a different way, and they couldn't see it. They sort of distanced themselves. They didn't know me. I was like, who is this weirdo? Like that was the idea. And James was really struggling. And I tried to talk, preach, fix, tell them what to do. And they just got more distant. And what I've learned on that process was that there's 3 seeds that you can go to when dealing with other people in addiction, or any mental suffering for that matter. The first one is talking seed, telling them what to do. It doesn't work. Might be able to plant the seed with that, very unlikely. But it doesn't work, and people start to get further and further away, because at its core, they have something that's a coping mechanism for their pain. So you're literally trying to pull their armor off. That's what you're doing. So they're going to say, no way, get away from me. I'm keeping this armor. It protects me. So the talking seed really doesn't work. And that's what most people tend to do. They try to fix other people by telling them what to do. And they don't even know what the problem is, which is interesting. And I'd gone through that process and I was still doing it. But the second seed is the listening seed. And you can't make someone listen, so it's passive, which can be challenging for people. But if you can go to them and say, look, if you want to talk, I don't know what's going on, but I'll be here to listen. And if they do talk, listen to understand. Don't try to be fixing the problem in a backhanded way. Fully be there with your presence, your awareness, and listen so they feel seen and heard. And if they feel that, they will come back again and again and again. And just be there as their conduit for them to open up and let the change happen itself. Very, very difficult to do. The skill of listening is really, really challenging. But the third seed is the action seed. And the action seed is looking after yourself. Get your own house in order. And it was only when I personally got my own house in order, I stopped preaching. I'd really worked on myself. I'd harnessed the ability to listen if somebody wanted to tell me something. My brother James had his own rock bottom. He got into so much cocaine debt that he had to bring drugs into the company to get rid of his debts. The police were onto him and they raided the gaff. My dad was in the gaff at the time. His name is James as well. The package was on the name. So my dad got arrested, went into the prison for a few days. My brother James is such a sensitive soul. It broke him to the core. And when that happened, because I had stopped becoming the preacher and I was someone that could listen, and he's seeing Brian as somebody that knows what he's doing. He's been there. He's done that. He came to me. He looked for advice. He went to the Rutland Centre. He got treatment. James has a really bad stammer, had a really bad stammer, and all he ever wanted to do was find love and settle down with a girl that he loved and have kids, but he couldn't speak to girls because of a stammer. Since he went to the Rutland Centre 4 years ago, he got to the bottom of his stammer. He worked on himself. He done the right things. He met a girl from Brazil, Helen her name is, an absolutely beautiful human being. And ironically, on the International Stammering Day for Men, he said his vows at the top of the hotel on his wedding day to get married to Helen. It was an incredible, incredible moment. And I wouldn't give much James. It's sort of give me a lot of credit for that, but I'll give all the credit for him. But I definitely served as an example of someone taking action for themselves, so he's seen it could be done. And I was someone that could listen to him when he wanted to talk to me. And I think the important element of that is because I get some people, mothers or fathers, coming to me saying, how can I tell me kids that they're struggling with anxiety? And I could be looking at them saying, well, I wouldn't listen to you. You're a ball of anxiety, giving me advice on anxiety. You've got to get your own house in order first. That's really clear. It's not self-centered. It's sensible. You've got to look after you. And only when you have those foundations, then you can help other people. My 3 core values are energy, health, relationships. But it's got to be health. That helps me with my energy, and that helps me in my relationships. It's in that order. So my relationships are the most important thing to me, but the other 2 will have to be prioritized in order for me to give my all to other people. So yeah, that's the perspective that I try to look on life with that.
How do you keep your own house in order? What are some of your go-tos?
My go-tos, I have one go-to, which is two massive non-negotiables in terms of tools and tactics. The first one is my morning routine. I have a 3-minute morning routine. It's called the bag technique. It's breath work. I was going to say breakfast there. It's not breakfast. It's breath work. Breath work, affirmations, and gratitude. And it's a minute of each. Breath work, I do a thing called a physiological sigh, but I can play around. As humans, we love novelty, so it's good to play around with different techniques. So I just do a minute of breath work. I do a minute of affirmations. I affirm to myself. Sometimes I say, my name is Brian, I'm strong, I can handle anything. I have a couple of different mantras in that as well. And again, language is a vehicle for emotion. So affirmations have power. And if you say it like 10, 15 times and start to embody it, after about 5 or 6, you really start to feel something happening. So minute of breath work, minute of affirmations, and a minute of gratitude. But it's not a gratitude list. I really try to go deep in a visualization story. I visualize the people in my life, the animals in my life, like pets, the kids in my life, and I experience the time I've spent with them, the hugs, the play, the laugh, the memories. Really try to embody those feelings. And I genuinely, every morning, after my 3-minute morning routine, it's like I've given myself an injection of positivity. Like they all tap into neuroscience, so it's just, and it sets your intentions for the day. It makes me feel better, but it sets my intentions for the day. Because I think a core component of the world of life is that life will try to pull you off course. So you feel like staying in bed. You feel like having a bottle of wine. You feel like avoiding that difficult conversation. But if you have values and you know what's important, my mental health, so I'm going to act and change how I feel. Like mood follows action, motion drives emotion. So the action of a morning routine is an action that changes how I feel. So that's non-negotiable every single morning, and it's only 3 minutes, so it's super simple, super quick. But the second one is exercise. So it's just, and it's such a powerful, like, everyone knows exercise is good for you, but when you really dig into the science, into the mechanics and the biochemistry of exercise, it's so much better than most people think. And going forward, I think it's going to be a lot more emphasis put on exercise for metabolic health, cardiovascular health, psychological health, emotional health, and then the interplay between metabolic health and emotional health and psychological health, that mind-body connect. So if I ever feel a little bit down, or I feel a little bit, I don't really get down, but if I feel a little bit anxious, overwhelmed, or not 100%, I'll go for a run. I'll go to the gym. And I would train about 5 times a week anyway. I have a rule for next year is to sweat at least once every day. So we'll see how that goes.
Nice one. Get a sauna for your new house there.
Yeah. So rest days. That's true. I'll do that.
Nice one. So you've gone on to become a doctor.
Yeah.
And you know, when I came across your Instagram page, even today, I was looking at your, the first line, previous heroin addict turned doctor. Even that line in itself was like, wow. However, what are some of the things that you have learned through this process of studying and becoming the doctor that you feel is not being spoken about enough, or there's not enough emphasis on in today's society that many people need to hear?
Wow, whether I learned that through the process of the PhD and the research is an interesting thing. One thing that really comes to mind is, and it's something that's part of my research. So my PhD research was really focusing on addiction. And the big study actually got wiped out by COVID. So it sort of forced me to look into another study, which turned out to be really super interesting. So we were looking at emotion-driven pathways to alcohol misuse. And I think that's something that's really important. Again, back to that root cause. Like, people think they have a drinking problem or a drug problem. They don't. They have a root cause problem, which is usually emotional, generally always emotional in some way. But it could be negative emotions, but even positive emotions can lead to addictive tendencies as well. But I was really interested in this idea of wanting more. And through Gabor Mate's work, he talks about chasing the hungry ghost, or I love that line, like, most people are trying to fill a hole in their soul. And the hole of their soul could be disconnection. It could be abandonment at an early age. It could be loneliness. It could be lack of self-worth. There's something missing. They're lacking meaning and purpose as a result of that. There's something missing in their lives. And they're trying to fill that missing hole with materialistic pursuits, drugs, substances, sex, gambling, these external things that do not fill the hole in their soul. It just won't. It might give them an initial pleasure, but it doesn't fill the hole. So I wanted to explore that from an academic perspective. And I noticed that when I was in recovery, if anything made me feel good, I'd want more. Give me more. And I found this with many people in recovery as well. I was playing golf about 10 times a week in early recovery. When I found out there was no parade and I had no friends, I was going playing golf on my own every day because I had nothing to do. I had no job. And but if it felt good, give me more. And even my unmet needs of like, I had an unmet need in terms of I love to learn. So I learned and I learned and I learned. That turned into something really good, but I had to get balance on that as well, because it nearly got me to relapse in 2015. So I was chasing something as well. So I explored this in terms of materialism, because that was the only existing psychometric construct for wanting more. And what we found was that there was a link with people with negative emotions, especially acting impulsively on negative emotions, especially to cope. This susceptibility or mindset in terms of wanting more can lead you down a much darker path. And I think this is something, like, you could talk about consumerism, materialism, whatever it is, but I see it with everybody. We want more. And I think something that I'm really looking into now that I would love to, I wish I'd done more research within it as well, is this idea of comfort. I read a great book recently called The Comfort Crisis. It's a great book.
Yeah, Michael Easter.
Yeah, it's a great book. Such a good book. And I'm actually going to do a Masogi in the new year. I'm going to do some big challenge in the new year. Yeah. So for anyone listening, the Masogi is like this super tough task that you should nearly fail. So I think I got a ruck vest and all. I'm going to pick a mountain, climb a mountain with the ruck. I'm well invested, yeah. So that's the plan for the new year. But I think we're struggling. There's so much comfort. Like, we're in room temperature, our cars, we're in heat regulated rooms, everything is comfortable. Like, even this idea that as soon as you feel hungry you eat, that's not how we evolved as humans. Like, hunger, we need to lean into that. And you look at the obesity crisis right now, like, it's food and crappy ultra processed food is there all the time. So it's like, and it taps into that idea of more social media, more food, more drugs, more pleasures. And it's leading us down a dodgy path. And I think the comfort crisis kind of taps into that as well. So I think we need a shift where we need to look at discomfort as a way of learning. Like, a good friend of mine, Neil O'Murray, who's a Wim Hof instructor, he just climbed a mountain there in a pair of shorts only over in Poland in the snow. And he's dying to share what he learned. And he says it was the most profound experience of his life. So we don't have to do all of these extreme things, but lean into discomfort. I think that's where our learning happens.
Even the things you're doing, which I do as well, the intermittent fasting, the cold heat exposure, the exercise,
they're not enjoyable.
Yeah, they're not. No.
I got an ice bath. I have it for Christmas. I'm getting for the new house. And I done my first ice bath there last couple of months ago. It was horrific. I'm not good in the cold, but how good I felt after it was incredible. So I'm going to lean into discomfort. 2024 every morning, start with an ice bath.
ice bath was a couple of months ago, so it didn't become a consistent thing, is it?
Yeah, it was a once off. I hadn't, so we're in an apartment, so I couldn't get an ice bath. So now we're moving into the house, so I have the ice bath coming up.
Oh man, sauna in the house, ice bath in the house.
Yeah,
well, you're gonna have a whole works there shebang. To keep you uncomfortable, and then chill out on the couch. Then and
that's it.
And you know the funny thing is about discomfort is the more you take on voluntary discomfort, the more comfortable your life becomes.
That's it. It's Neil has a great phrase. It's like the ice bath is like a metaphorical ice bath for life. Is the challenges you face. So when you get stressed out, you've harnessed the ability to sit with discomfort. So all of a sudden, life gets easier, and you will enjoy the comforts even more because you appreciate them more. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Brian, absolutely love this conversation, man.
Same,
it's been incredible to have you on the podcast here, and you have a lot of resources. You do a lot of speaking events. You have your book as well, which is incredible. I was looking at some of the reviews that you have on Amazon, and you're changing people's lives with every conversation and every word you write. So please let all the listeners of this podcast do them a massive favor and let them know where they can find you, reach out to you, buy your book, potentially join one of your speaking events. So let them know.
Cheers. Thanks, Gavin. So I think the go-to place to go is my website. So it's brianpennie.com. It's live. It's live a long time now, but I do have a new version of it now. It's in the works at the moment. It's still live. It's just going to be upgraded in the new year. But it's brianpennie.com, and speaking events, programs. There's lots of free resources on the website as well. So if you go to online resources and go to online courses, jump in there. And if you use the word resilience, that's a free code to get access to any of my courses. So anyone that's struggling out there, there's a course on addiction, unlocking the secrets of addiction recovery, master your self-talk, habit change. So free access using the word resilience there as well, and blogs and stuff like that as well. And then Instagram, Brian Pennie 78, and then LinkedIn. They're the two channels that are my go-to channels. But
brilliant. I'll add those links in the show notes below. Everyone wants to go check it out. This has been incredible, and I look forward to part 2 sometime maybe next year, and
definitely
talk us about your cold and heat exposure and all that's going. And I know you're always evolving and developing onto new things, so I'm very excited for what's to come for you.
Yeah, no, really appreciate this, Gavin. This is one of my favourite, if not my favourite podcasts of all time. I think I came in, felt super relaxed. I think, I just absolutely enjoyed it. I think definitely a part 2. I feel we only touched the surface with some things as well, so that's definitely on the cards. But totally pleasure. Thanks for having me, man.
Brilliant. Thank you, my man.
Thank you.